Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Flying with Spurts. Now it's time for some Harrier hijinks.
Caution, caution.
Well, we're finally here. The Harrier FM review. Now there's no EM charts for me to compare this to, only got fun rendering artifacts. Great for initial multi-threading bugs. No worries. So there's no public EM diagrams for me to review and compare it to like there was for the Tomcat. So we're going to go off anecdotal and comparative performance. The weight today will be extremely low on fuel. And clean pylons with the gun pod. Reason being is that this is representative of how I tested the Hornet, Tomcat, and Viper. And the low fuel state represents the same amount of time at maximum power. So, let's talk about maximum power. The Harrier has an RPM gauge. Actually gives a lot of information about what's happening in the engine. Nozzle position, engine RPM, jet pipe temperature, pounds of water, stabilator trim position, fuel flow. Those will come up later. There's a little button underneath the water. Combat thrust. Without it, the slow spooling engine will do about 109%. With combat thrust, it'll go to 111%. Now the engine can handle this for about 10 minutes. Which is longer than the amount of fuel we currently have on board. I'm going to put us in the air-to-air gunnery mode. So we see on the left-hand side of the HUD, we have true airspeed, angle of attack, Mach, current G, and then that looks like maybe some navigation stuff beneath that, and the maximum G we've pulled thus far. We have a gun cross, and a little floating gun sight. Now, as there's no radar, this is not a lead computing optical sight. I'm going to reduce power to about 100%. And it instead represents a distance and size for milliradians. It has two settings, close and far, 1,200 feet, 2,400 feet, and in both cases, the inside diameter of the circle is about 30 feet. or the wingspan of an F-16. The outer wing bars are a total of about 55 feet in both cases, or more than anything that's not a Tomcat. So how do you use this in a gunfight? What if you're up against something with a 45-foot wingspan, like a Hornet or an Eagle? Well, that's about one full circle plus one wing. Which means if you are holding this Pipper right on a Tomcat, right on a Hornet, and its wingspan is about halfway out, those little wings sticking out the side of the circle, then you're spot on. And as far as how accurate the gun is, well, let me turn it on. It's pretty accurate. So, for the quick dogfighting FM review, that's about all I'm going to say about the air-to-air gunnery. Oh, no, wait, that's not all I'm going to say. The gun requires a few things in order to work. Your RPM cannot be too low. So about 64% is what was required for me to squeeze a trigger. Your vector, your nozzle position, cannot be too high. Up to about 30 degrees, it fires. By 40, it does not. That is all I have to say about the air-to-air gun. Spurts, what are all these V's dancing all over the place? Well, that's the hotspot detector. If you don't mess with that and get into a dogfight, that will, one, help you locate your target when they're in the HUD at long distance reasonably well, and it'll obscure your shot some. It just is what it is. Alright. Handling characteristics. As we'll talk about in a minute, we'll get into the maximum lift, the CL alpha curve later. But at high speed, you can get to a decently high G loading. And you can stall out. There's no flight control limiting system here. So you can over G and snap a wing off, or you can pull too much AOA and tuck a wing. Now, a Harrier pilot I spoke to said that there's an insidious departure characteristic at high speed where the aileron stops, which come in at high speed, can be overridden with enough force. Now, either the override is not modeled or the departure characteristic is not modeled, because he discussed being at 370 knots and 4 Gs and putting lateral stick input in and entering a snap roll so violent the plane registered 9.9 Gs and he bashed his head against the plexiglass so hard that it left an impression from his helmet. And he's known of people dying from this departure characteristic. Well, we don't have to worry about that, thankfully. So, angle of attack. Don't let it get over 20. You don't really get anything extra past 20, and it just becomes easier to stall out. Now the stick input is not linear to angle of attack the way it is for the Tomcat. So you can't just look in the HUD once, hold the stick input, and carefully look around to find your opponent. Well, I guess you can if you're stable at airspeed, but as speed changes, your angle of attack changes. Whereas the Tomcat will pretty much hold an angle of attack with stick input within a given wing sweep position, of course. So, much like flying the Tomcat, flying the Hornet and getting used to its handling quirks is a lot of, well, 1v0 time. A lot of time just getting a feel for it, flying around, goofing off, seeing what tries to kill you and what doesn't. The Harrier does not roll with rudder the way a Tomcat does. So, don't try. As you can see, I'm holding full left rudder now, and it's doing diddly squat. Full right rudder, diddly squat. Whereas I can do stick input, and it goes over. It's still a little slow. If you need to reverse, this is really playing where you need to drop alpha, roll, and add alpha. So, not quite the best for scissors in that sense. Now, how's it do in the bucket? We hold 20 angle of attack until we get down to about 200 knots. And this is where it's stable in the bucket. You still have some lateral stick control, as long as you're careful about your angle of attack. And let me get back in there. Alright, so back in the bucket. You do still have decent climb potential from the bucket condition. So if you need to use the vertical, you can. You also have the option of using vector. Now this is a double-edged sword, especially this low to the ground. Alright, nice and stable in the bucket. And I'm going to put on some vector, and we're going to watch the G go up, and then the G will go down, because I will slow way, way down. And my speed will go way, way down.
Caution, caution.
For that brief moment, the nose kind of surged around. It activated my reaction control system. So now I have puffer ports.
15 seconds. 15 seconds.
That came out to help improve my roll control, pitch control. See, now my maximum RPM is only 108%. I have lost power, damaged the engine. Somebody wants to try to go up out of a bucket. Well, here we are at 60 plus degrees and not appreciably slowing down. So you can follow them for quite a while. And then while most planes start really losing control under these airspeeds, we put on a little nozzle, activate the reaction control system,
Limiter off. Limiter off. Caution.
and then we maintain Plenty of control.
Limiter off. Limiter off. Caution. Caution.
Those were commanded rolls to the left and right
Limiter off.
as I push the
Limiter
nose down.
off. Caution. Caution.
Now we have damaged the engine even more by spending all that extra time at the higher RPM that comes with deploying the nozzles. See, RPM goes up, jet pipe temperature goes up. Damages the engine. So don't think that you can just honk around and use the thrust vectoring all day long. Alright, well. I think that's about all I have to say on the handling characteristics. The wingborne handling characteristics. Okay, here we are. This is how the Harrier in green stacks up against the Viper in black, the Hornet in blue, and the Tomcat in red. Now again, for anyone who may have missed the previous discussion about these charts, the red Tomcat line represents, well, me flying. The maximum G is up around 10, and I deploy the landing flaps when below 200 knots. So that's why it has the highest instantaneous turn rate and why it bubbles down here. The Hornet line represents a paddle pulling Hornet, as that is what is commonly occurring on the PvP servers. The black line is just the Viper. You get what you get. So we see that with about an 8.8 Gs on the Harrier, so a little bit lower than everyone else. Beyond that, you risk ripping the wings off. Even that gets a little dicey. But it has no flight control system to dampen its AOA. So you get that full pull until you get all the way to min radius. Now, if we look way down at the back end, down in the bucket region, its radius is close to that of the Viper, which of course is to say not very good. And it does not quite have the power to sustain the turn rate of the Viper, which is why you end up with people who pull a little bit of nozzle and try to change up the game. Now, I can't put that on here because those conditions do not hold steady long enough for me to actually make a chart of it. So, you can do some decent instantaneous turns around 0.55 Mach, and your sustained turn rate is going to be lower than everybody else's. Alright, what about P sub S? Yeah, here we have the P sub S lines, and we see that, again, it's just lower than everyone else's. Now, it's still good enough that you don't get into a terminal bucket condition the way that the Hornet will, and you don't quite get as slow as the Tomcat will let you. So you do have a little bit more vertical option available to you against those two at the lowest speeds, and you have to be careful and use that in the right way at the right time. But as you can see, the PSUBS never gets very high. It stays between 200 and under 400 for most of the applicable speed range. Now, because by default you do have a greater than 1-to-1 thrust to weight ratio at sea level, you can initially do vertical climb with the big boys if they try to go vertical on you, even in afterburner. So you can keep that in mind. All in all, Harrier's a lot of fun to fly. It has a unique and quirky flight model with some interesting characteristics, but I really enjoy it. And if you guys decide to fly it later, I hope you do too. The last thing that I want to talk about with the Harrier flight model is the lift curve, which, as you can see here, it's fairly linear up to about 20 degrees where it flattens off rapidly. So as you approach 20 degrees, don't even bother trying to go farther. Well, I think that about wraps it up. Well, that wraps it up. I hope you had fun watching. Thanks for flying with me. See you next time.